When I was 2 years old, when I was dedicated to the cause of Lucifer, I was at that point a seventh generation witch.
I was laying there, practically naked, and I had her hold me as if I was naked. I couldn't talk. I couldn't open my eyes. I believe my eyes were rolled up back in my head.
There was evidence of human sacrifice on this site. One of my first questions I asked the guy, is there evidence of human sacrifice? Now we looked around there. Yes. We found the man with his fingers like it was a Richard sacrifice.
And at that point, that basically said, do you know what they did to us? And that's when I fled that home.
But no, they would touch me. They would put pictures in my head if they wanted to communicate with me. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. Implants are real, okay? You know, we've got them on X-ray, we've got them on CAT scan, we've got them on the Gauss meter, which measures magnetic field 7.5. We've got them on an ultrasound machine. It's right there. It's hard, physical evidence, not delusionary.
You know, I always feel like I need to say something witty or kind of crazy, like, hey, babe, kind of like Jeff on the Leisure Hour. Like, what's going on, Roberino? Something like that. But I always try to find a way to bring it in, I guess.
Can we all have like Brooklyn code names?
Sure. What's a Brooklyn code name?
Like Tony and Tony and
yeah, like
Tony, Petey and Bolly.
Tony Baloney Breath. like every time you watch a Marky Mark movie, like they call
a Marky Mark movie. It takes place in Boston.
Boston. Oh yeah. Whoops, not Brooklyn, Boston. Get mixed up. Geographically mixed up. There.
Everybody gets their own the Departed nickname. Is that what you're
yeah,
saying?
There you go.
Don't you watch a Marky Mark movie? It's Mark Wahlberg. He's a serious actor. Happy New Year, guys. It is January the 3rd as we record this on Conspiranormal, first episode of 2016, and happy to be here. We got, of course, producer Rob in the house.
Always.
Whoop, whoop.
And it's your host, Adam, the same guy it's always been. And over here is, right next to me is Mr. Lukey Duke.
Turbo.
That's right. Turbo Slut himself.
At radio friendly.
And we got a special guest on the show. I don't know if he wants to talk or not, but it's, Debo over here.
How's it going?
Good friend of Luke's. And we used to work together at the old Biggie frame back in the day.
Tons of fun.
Yeah, tons of fun. Oh man. So how was New Year's, Lukey? How was Christmas?
Man.
Saturnalia, the Feast of Mithras. Did you sacrifice any animals?
I couldn't this year. My girlfriend would get mad at me. So
too much blood in the house or something?
All family stuff, man. I had to endure it. A lot of driving. I'm glad it's over. But it was fun.
Yeah,
it was kind of
fun. 50 people you got to go see like every Christmas, right?
Yeah. When that's a part of getting old. Like when you get old, you just want all of the younger people to come see you. And that's like your whole initiative in life after.
Come see me, please.
Until you're the patriarch of the family, and then you have a gathering of 40 children and grandchildren, and everyone comes to your house and cooks, and you just kind of sit there in your chair and eat.
Yeah, you just smile at everybody because at some point you can't hear anymore. So
right. Really looking forward to those days.
Well, I mean, you had like a down home country Christmas, like with your girlfriend and
I did
everything, and
we ate the traditional meals all day long. Ham, eggs, and wait, that was Christmas. Never mind. I don't know. It all blurs together.
Right. What's your New Year's? Did you get rowdy, man?
I did, yeah. We went to the hippie house and partied over there.
The hippie house. What's the hippie house?
Well, I mean, exactly like it sounds. It's just it's a bunch of hippies that listen to the Grateful Dead, and they're all super cool. I mean, super nice people give you the shirt off their back.
These weren't the same people that put on Circus O'Gay, right?
No. These are
totally different
but
people.
they would be at that party.
They'd probably just be kind of stoned in the background, right? They wouldn't be
Right. They'd have their own little clique in the corner, all just passing the bong back and forth on the couch.
we don't condone that, by the way.
No.
Right. Family friendly.
Family friendly show. Exactly. Well, Rob, how about yourself? How was your Christmas?
Christmas was really good. I got a bottle of whiskey and a shop vac, so I got drunk and cleaned the studio.
Hey, that's the gift that keeps on giving is a shop vac.
Right. Yeah.
We could see, like, obviously how much love Rob puts into this place too. Every time we're in here, things are moved around and decorations and lights.
I
And
hung a new poster up today.
yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
The M32.
How was New Year's Eve for you? New Year's Day?
It was lame. It was
Lame.
I'm getting old. It was
Mine was
like
lame too.
Yeah, I came home and it was like a struggle just to stay awake till midnight. You know, I had the hardest time finding Nashville's New Year's thing on TV. I thought for sure like one of the local channels would be broadcasting live from downtown. There's multiple stages and all this music and all this.
One would think
We're going to compete with the rest of the world as far as New Year's Eve parties goes. And then there's nothing. You couldn't find it anywhere.
Yeah, this was supposedly a big deal this year.
That's
weird. It was like a record number of people again. And so I watched New York's thing because I couldn't watch Nashville's thing. And it was a struggle.
Which is delayed, by the way,
yeah.
when you think about it, because of the time difference.
It got to like, I watched the ball drop and I pretty much got up and went
Passed
straight to
out.
bed. That was, yeah.
Well, I mean, I was working that night. It's always a good night to be making deliveries. So I was actually I delivered, the last delivery I took was at like close to 1:30 in the morning to somebody named Cam Daddy in a hotel. So, that was, Hermitage keeps it classy.
It was either the extended stay or Hermitage Inn.
Yeah, no. We don't go to the Hermitage Inn. It was. I'm sure everybody did not Nashville for all our people and listen to us in Russia, but it was just one of the crappy hotels on the little Old Hickory Boulevard strip there. So
Gotcha.
It was, it was classy. It made pretty good money, so not complaining too
Cam
much.
Daddy.
Although I did have to open the next morning. That wasn't very much fun. So, but anyway,
That's just evil.
yeah. Well, I got there about 10:30, so it wasn't that bad.
Oh, I had to work too.
Oh, good. Well, good. I'm glad about that. About a month or so ago now, we had on the show Rebecca Roth, who we talked about 9/11 and the conspiracy there. She was the former flight attendant that wrote the books Methodical Illusion and Methodical Deception. And Dr. Future sat in with us on that one. And I feel like that was one of our best interviews.
Yeah, that was a good show.
But recently, there's been some controversy over her. And I kind of want to take the next few minutes and explore kind of like this controversy that's been going on with Rebecca Roth. And this idea that people are accusing of her of saying things and are actually saying that being someone that she's not, or using an assumed name. So I want to kind of start with, what I kind of, for lack of a better term, think is the anti-Rebecca Roth. This is from jamesperloff.com. He is a 9/11 truther. I don't really know a lot about this guy, but he seems like he could be a good potential guest for the show. I'll kind of skip over his little blurb about himself here, although he did write a book called Shadows of Power, which seems kind of interesting. So he talks about being a 9/11 truther, and we'll start up from here. In all those years, I've never written a negative article about someone else in alternative media. Doing so could play into the PTBs, that's powers that be, divide and conquer strategy. However, today I'm making an exception. When Rebecca Roth's Methodical Illusion appeared a year ago, I rejoiced. A flight attendant joining the truth movement, a 9/11 truth movement. I heard her impressively interviewed on the Hagman and Hagman report. I personally commended her for her book, to which she cordially replied, gave it a 5-star Amazon review, linked to her from this website, and recommended her to radio hosts I knew. I was therefore surprised in August to receive an unpleasant email from Roth directed against myself. Since the email was private, I kept my reply, factually debunking her allegations, private also. However, I resolved if she took her accusations public, I would also go public, so people could see precisely what had been said and decide the matter for themselves. I did not hear back from her. I did, however, do something I'd never done with anyone before, removed Roth from this website's links page. Incidentally, Roth's website links to nobody. I don't quite understand what he's trying to say there, I have to admit. I'd almost forgotten the episode until a couple of weeks ago, when a truther friend sent me a video of Jim Fetzer, we know that name well here, yes, interviewing Alan Powell about Roth, a major focus, the uncanny resemblance between Roth's voice and that of a Monica Gaynor, who pitches doTERRA essential oils on a show called Fix Your Health. That's spelled P-H-I-X, okay, as in prescription. My friend had begun listening in the middle of the Fetzer interview, thought she was hearing a clip of Roth, and was stunned to learn it was Gaynor. I suggest starting around the 13-minute mark and decide for yourself. Then he has a video of Jim Fetzer. Also, the voice of Michael Harris, the Fix Your Health man, introducing Gaynor, markedly resembles Ross Radio co-host Ramjet. For those who consider the similarities coincidental, turn to the acknowledgments at the back of Methodical Illusion. Among the three there, Roth includes the Fix Your Health team. Methodical Illusion also works in doTERRA. On page 15, he says, I must interject. Products do require marketing, and I'm not going to read this part because this is just more about criticizing their product, which has really nothing to do with the rest of this. More importantly, if as they contend Roth doubles as Monica Gaynor, credibility issues arise. Here's how Roth's book introduces her. I enjoyed a nearly 30-year career working as both a flight attendant and an international purser. I was trained as an emergency medical technician and served as a volunteer firefighter. Here's Michael Harris introducing Gaynor, condensed for brevity. Let me share with you a little about Monica. She has studied or been involved in natural healing methodologies for nearly 30 years. Blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to read that part. I'm not suggesting Rebecca Roth couldn't simultaneously maintain two careers. Many people, myself included, have done that, but the achievements, masteries claimed for Gaynor sound rather extensive for a career flight attendant. And personally, if I had very many well-known NBA players as clients, I doubt that I'd need a second job. Talk about this Monica Gaynor, who they think Rebecca Roth is, having clients that are in the NBA. That was in the previous paragraph. Being a Bostonian, there you go, Boston. I'll observe that Monica is the Boston accent version of the word moniker, meaning name or alias, and Gaynor, carrying its own implications, is much more typically spelled Gaynor, Gaynor, as with the actress Misty Gaynor. If Roth is only, as she says, devoted to truth, why market products under a false name? Some may say she has to protect her identity so the CIA won't bump her off. Okay, maybe that can fly for 9/11, but for essential oils? Essentially, incidentally, a pen name won't bamboozle modern surveillance agencies like the CIA or NSA. Some say the rarely photographed Roth wears glasses and somewhat frumpy hairstyle are a wig for a safety disguise. But does Methodical Illusion really contain assassination bait? It's a novel mostly without real names like Bush, Cheney, or Rumsfeld. In the end, the hero is the president himself, a Speaker of the House turned president by default. Methodical Illusion's faith in the U.S. government's self-correcting capacity hardly seems like something that would put you in CIA crosshairs, though I've heard her sharply condemn the government on radio. According to Fetzer, when Dennis Chimino, a former Navy electronics troubleshooter, interviewed Roth, Chimino noticed Roth's call traced to Langley, Virginia, home of CIA headquarters. That's according to Fetzer. Methodical Illusion consumes some 160 fiction pages before really addressing 9/11. When it does, much of it retreads work of others. Pages 209 to 212 contain a thinly disguised rephrasing of James Corbett's video 9/11: The Truth in 5 Minutes. Certainly, Roth offers special flight attendant insights that are fresh. She is noted, for example, that cockpits had pilot axes that box cutters would have been no match for. She also has a completely unique take on the plane's fates. I do not concur with the suggestion that Roth was ever a flight attendant. She's too well versed in that profession, and a fake would easily risk exposure on radio. Nevertheless, over recent days, several truthers besides Fetzer and Powell have noticed a dark side, although Roth has cried trolls that label is wearing thin. On December 23rd, radio host Pete Santilli announced he is removing his interview with Roth from his archives due to too many unanswered questions about her. Santilli says he has never done this with any other guest. Roth moved to TalkNetwork.com, but the network has now announced the Rebecca Roth Show is no longer carried by TalkNetwork.com. We wish Rebecca, or whatever her real name is, the greatest success somewhere else. On December 29th, Natural News renounced Roth as a possible government plant, said Mike Adams. Observing her behavior, we came to find that she's an expert in infiltration and provocateur-type operations, getting groups of people to turn on each other and causing chaos inside the truth movement. A leader in exposing Roth is Kurt Haskell, famed as attorney-turned-truther after personally witnessing the underwear bomber fiasco. He now lives in Costa Rica hosting a show called Real Investigations. Haskell goes into depth about Roth through various aliases and background. Okay. Now, here's the deal. I don't necessarily agree with most of that article. That was kind of like the fairest that I think that I could have found about this whole issue. And that wasn't biased, I think, to either side, although still...
Just laying out the issue itself.
Yeah, still laying out the issue. I'm sure there's still a little bit more bias there. You know, well, let's do this. Okay. I have a clip of Rebecca Roth, or whatever her name is, talking about, this is from her radio show. She put out a 14-minute video on YouTube. This is about a little less than 3 minutes of it. And I want the audience and us to listen to this, and let's hear her explanation. And she's going to come out and say, although she doesn't come out and say it, she does show it in the video. But let's listen to that now. When you hear the beep, turn the page.
Reading Rainbow.
I would just like everyone to know that in the fall of 2014, I had finished writing a book that exposed what happened to the planes and passengers on 9/11. I discovered this using government data and also using my 30-year airline career, knowing the FAA hijacking protocols that were not followed by the flight attendants or the pilots, and continuing to look and using information that I knew about cell phones, etc. Well, I sat on that information in that book for nearly 2 years, and then I decided to release it all in this novel. I chose to use the pen name Rebecca Roth to help protect me from those who might do me harm, because I knew that the information that I had was rather explosive. Understandably so, you think about people like Michael Hastings, Andrew Breitbart, Art Bell, who just recently shut down his show for fear of his life and harassment by these trolls. So, I knew that I had disclosed information in this book and that my sequel would come out that were potentially risky to my own life. As a matter of fact, when I do interviews, almost every person who's ever interviewed me in the last 14 months has asked me if I fear my life from the government. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that the threat would come from those who profess to want to know the truth about 9/11. We often refer to them as 9/11 truthers. For the past 13 months, and particularly the past several weeks, the internet truther trolls have been attempting to expose me as a fraud, and they have made claims that I never flew as a flight attendant and a purser in order to discredit my airline career. I have said in my books, everything that I've said in my books is true, and I can only imagine that they are actually working to help protect the real perpetrators of 9/11 that I have exposed. There is no other explanation. So, how wrong they are, because things are going to come out again in another novel. They have been anxiously engaged in uncovering every aspect of my personal life. Some of it's true, most of it is not. They put the lives of innocent people and friends at risk, and I just cannot abide by that. They have crossed a line, so I have decided to come out underneath the pen name Rebecca Roth and tell you my real name and prove to you, once and for all, that I'm not a fraud. I'm not a CIA agent, as they claim. I'm not a chemist working for a 6-year-old essential oil company. I am not a chemist at all. I was a purser and I did fly for nearly 30 years, retiring in 2004.
Okay. So cut it off there a little bit because I'm kind of an idiot. But it said 2004 was when she retired there at the end. Now she doesn't come out and say, and I'm going to have a link to this video on the show notes so people can watch this if they want. She doesn't come out and say who she is, but she does show some materials. So her name, she's saying her name is Corey Ann, spelled Koreann, Ashley, Ashli. That's what she's saying her name is. She has she used to work for Northwest Airlines is what she shows on the video. And she has this all kind of laid out on the video. Cards, some flight attendant stuff, name tags, stuff like that.
Why would she bother at this point giving her real name? I wouldn't. I would continue to keep a moniker.
Right. Well, okay. This is the issue. Okay. And I want to read what she says on the notes here of her video. She says, since the release of my first novel, Methodical Illusion, I have been gang stalked by a group of internet trolls. They have accused over a dozen of people of being me, posted people's home addresses on the internet, and endangered my friends and family. They claim I never worked as a flight attendant and that I am a fraud. Well, here is your proof of what airline I worked for 31 years and my rank as flight attendant and purser. They also claim that I am a secret agent for the CIA, but clearly anyone who has read my books knows that is insane to even suggest. They claim I am a chemist, and that is also untrue. I started my flight career in 1973 and left in 2004. I wrote my novels exposing the truth that I had discovered using U.S. government data and nearly a terabyte of Freedom of Information Act releases that any interested 9/11 researcher could have requested. They didn't, which she talked about on the show. Inside the government documents, I uncovered shocking information I knew would endanger my life and my family and friends. I chose to keep myself out of the picture. After all, it was all about the truth about 9/11, not about me. Trolls, however, think differently. They think if they can claim I was never an airline employee, that's what I wrote in my novels could not be real or true. Perhaps they are working for the real perpetrators of 9/11. They have not just attacked the messenger to kill the message, but in their incompetence, they have endangered women that probably don't even know the books exist. Nobody should tolerate this type of behavior, and I do not. I have legal counsel and will pursue this as a legal matter should this character assassination over 2 novels continue. Okay. Look, I want to ask you a question. Okay. Define an internet troll for me.
An internet troll is someone who gets a rise out of, tries to get a rise out of people, basically. I mean, that's the easiest way to put it. I mean,
okay.
And, hurling insults and just perpetuating untrue information and
harassing people from the safety of a computer.
So that would apply in her case, even though we know that it's Fetzer and some of these other guys. We know the names of these guys that are saying that she's not who she really says she is and all this. So would you consider that still a troll? I just want to know if her verbiage is correct.
Yes, because I think it's likely that the people that are trolling here are making up things, just unfounded claims.
Right.
So, unfounded claims is trolling.
Okay.
Synonymous.
Okay. So here's the crux of this, right? She is using a pen name. How's that unusual?
It's not at all.
Using a pen name to write. I mean, of course, Mark Twain comes to mind. We all know that wasn't his name. J.K. Rowling has been mentioned in this respect. We all know that's not her real name.
Right. And when you're talking about someone who's divulging sensitive material that they think is important to a government conspiracy, like it's not at all unthinkable or unheard of.
Right. Exactly. The thing is that the 9/11, here's two things. The 9/11 truther community is so paranoid that this lady comes in with a pen name and they just automatically just kind of attack her. Now, in Fetzer's defense, somewhat, apparently she did say some things about him and said that he was a drunk and all this kind of stuff. And that's kind of what set him off and kind of set him on this path with his guys to try to find out what was going on here. To be fair to him. But to be fair to her, when you have this kind of like paranoia within this community, it's like, and it's reasonable to think that they would be paranoid, okay? Because there have been, agent provocateurs, government spies. This, what is the FBI program, COINTELPRO, which we talked a little bit about that with Craig Ciccone last year. Those kind of things do happen. But they have attacked her and kind of just basically forced her to use her real name so she can reestablish her credibility.
Right.
That's what Luke was getting at there. Like, why even bother? Why even say the real name?
Well, and I do want to say that, this isn't a job for us. It's more of a civic responsibility that we've all sort of picked up.
Yeah.
Trying to find the truth and it's important to keep those checks and balances, whether it's checking other people in the community or whether it's, checking the government or whether it's what have you. Trying to get to the bottom of things is important, but there comes a point where it's like, discord and stuff among the community can kind of just make it that much harder to do what we're trying to do.
And the same thing happens in the ghost hunting community. We've seen it happen there. People accusing each other of this, people accusing each other of that. We've seen it happen, and I've seen it happen in the fringe Christian community too. All these different kinds of, like, this whole flat earth controversy that's just ridiculous. But it's like, first of all, people have no sense of humor. And second of all, if somebody wants to protect themselves or they want to protect their family or they want to protect the company that they used to work for, that's certainly their prerogative. And even now that she has come out and said what her name is, there's still people in that truther community that are saying, that's not her real name. That's not her name at all. Her name is blah, 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 blah. She's still lying.
Well,
why does she give us a picture of her in her flight attendant uniform? It's like, and even it's like, it's weird, man.
Well, and my point is that I even though I believe that all those people are wrong, I still think it's important to have a whole crap ton of people out there that are wrong, because that's the only way that there's a handful of people that are sometimes right.
Yeah, I agree with that. But it's like, it's like, I really think even if she said, okay, here's a picture of me in a flight attendant's uniform, somebody else will come on the internet and say it was photoshopped.
Yeah.
So where does it end? Where do you go?
It doesn't.
I mean, it's like there's egos involved too. People's feelings get hurt. Like, I really think Fetzer, I think his feelings got hurt, and that's what set this whole thing off. Because Fetzer himself has a lot of pull in the community. And her, and I already thought about this, but like Ramjet or whatever, that her little co-host, he said something like that she was, that the reason why this was happening because she was a woman and that she was making all the old boys club jealous,
That's not going to help.
You know what? I don't know. There might be something to that. There might not be. I don't know. But it's like, this is kind of the reason why
conspiracies are for men.
Yeah.
Men only.
This is kind of the reason why you kind of like, try to stay out of things like this. Like, look, for the record, I support her. She can come on the show anytime she wants. I don't care. When she has her new book out, we're going to have her back on. I don't care if her name is Rebecca or Corianne or Monica. I don't care.
I disagree. I'm not going to allow her back on unless I see a birth certificate.
yeah, right. Genetic stool sample or something, right?
I need a blood type, a birth certificate, stool sample.
You would want something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's how bad these things go, though, man. That's how bad this stuff gets. You know what I mean? Like the accusations that go back and forth. And that's why, like, when you get involved with any kind of community like this, and I've gotten involved with like the ghost hunting community and the French Christian community, and it's like every time there's always somebody coming up against loggerheads, and it's like, come on, people, try to work together. I mean, damn, I mean, if there is a government agent, it's kind of like that old Twilight Zone episode where, people on the street see this, they see a UFO go by, and then all of a sudden, like, everybody starts accusing each other of the other people of being aliens, and all of a sudden everybody just starts rioting because they all think that every one of the other one's aliens, and then you go over to the aliens sitting on the hilltop, and they're like, oh, our plan is working perfectly. We're going to turn them all against each other.
And that's what I was going to say.
That's the kind of stuff that's going on.
That's what I was going to say. The real enemy, that's what they want, is discord and disharmony and arguments and,
And I don't know about her phone number being in Langley, Virginia. I mean, if that's true, but it seems like if she was a CIA agent, don't you think they'd be a little less sloppy than that? To have your phone number appear as Langley, Virginia.
And nothing about what she's saying seems to be drawing attention away from anything important. Right. It's not like, oh, everybody on Facebook is posting rainbow flags. Let's focus on that for today. It's, it's,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And most people aren't going to care.
Right.
Most people are, I mean, she has her detractors. She has her supporters, and I think one of the things that has happened. Yeah. One of the things that has happened is that she's probably new at all this, and she's come into this, and all of a sudden people are just attacking her for the supposed pin name. So I guess that's it on the Rebecca Ross stuff. But anyway, we have coming up Brian Godawa, first guest of 2016. We're going to be talking to him about the Nephilim Chronicles. And Brian is also a screenwriter in Hollywood, so kind of cool. We're going to have another screenwriter from Hollywood next week. So we're going to call it here for the intro. And we'll be right back on Conspiranormal with Brian Godawa. All right, guys, so we're back on Conspiranormal and with the usual crew that you just heard. And we have joining us on the line, we have Brian Godawa, who we're very proud to have on. I have actually heard of Brian's books, The Chronicles of the Nephilim. I've listened to a lot of his interviews with Derek Gilbert on View from the Bunker. And Brian was always someone that I wanted to get on the show. And then lo and behold, about 2 months ago, I think now, he contacted us and said, hey, can I come on the show? I'm like, of course. So Brian, welcome to Conspiranormal.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on. I kind of want to get your background a little bit. Some of the, cause you are a screenwriter in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And what movies have you written? What have you worked on out there?
Not much. It's hard to get movies made in Hollywood. Let me tell you.
No doubt.
But anyway, there's some cool stuff coming down the horizon, which we can talk about eventually. But, what I'm most known for, what I'm most proud of is my first movie, which was To End All Wars. And that was back in 2001. You can see that on, I think, Amazon Prime now. And I don't know if it's on Netflix or not, but it stars Kiefer Sutherland and Robert Carlyle. And it actually was Kiefer Sutherland's one of his best roles, in my opinion. And it was the true story of prisoners of war under the Japanese in World War II. And if you've seen the movie Bridge on the River Kwai, the old 60s action movie,
yeah,
this was that story, but that story is a very Hollywood version of one little part of the bigger story. We told the bigger, broader story of the building of the railroad all the way up to the end, And anyway, that was in 2001, and that was sort of my first movie and launched me. And but it was such a privilege because I was the sole writer on the project, because of course they couldn't afford anyone else. It was a independent film, and so they couldn't afford anyone else to come back and rewrite it, which is what they do a lot in Hollywood, But because of that, I was able to really stay involved and see the vision to its completion in a real unified way that you can't when you hire all these other guys, because this guy's good at comedy, that guy's good at romance or whatever, adding the various elements. This guy's, beefs up the plot. But what can often happen is when people rewrite it is, they might add some good element, but sometimes they lose that unity of vision that can make something so powerful. And that's what I felt happened with Two Undead Wars. And since that time I'd made some other independent films, a couple of horror films, some documentaries and such. I've directed some documentaries, and it's been slim pickings over the last 10, 12 years. But in the meantime, sort of in the last 5 years, and part of my process of I guess expanding my writing horizons was, there was a couple of years where I had a real couple bad years with my screenwriting, and it's not unusual. A lot of people had that problem. And this is like 6 years back or so. And it forced me to reinvent myself and say, I can't just do the screenwriting thing. I got to do more. And how can I expand my horizons? And that's where I took up novel writing, because now with the self-publishing revolution, you don't have to get a publisher. So if you put all this work into it and they don't pick it up, fine, go out on your own and see if you can get lucky. And I did, and it worked. And that was the series launch of Chronicles of the Nephilim. And so my first novel was Noah Primeval. That was the first in the series. And what had happened was that so now I'm basically, I'm a writer that does movies, but also novels and, articles and such. And it's actually been a really fun, exciting thing, because it's in Hollywood, even if you're a successful writer, a lot of movies don't get made. Most movies don't get made. So you could be pulling in six figures, writing screenplays and never see a movie made. And
things sit on the shelf for a while out there.
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes never get made. And so it can be very unsatisfying and unhappy for writers, because we writers just want people to see to read our stories or hear our stories or see them. And, it's not even always about money, although we all want that, right? But anyway, so I know many screenwriters who have done really well financially, but they don't get many movies made, and they're very kind of unhappy. And so, while you're trying to get these movies made, if you can find an avenue where you can tell your stories and thousands of people will read them, such as self-publishing on Amazon, then that was a doorway that opened up. And at first what was really funny was it all started actually with the screenplay. Because years ago, I had started this research on this screenplay for a movie about something no one had ever done before. And there was such cool information on it that I'd never seen done before. And that was about Noah, right? And of course, as you know, Aronofsky's movie came out, last couple of years ago or whatever.
Right.
And at that time, he was just trying to get it sold or, whatever. It didn't come out. So by the time I'm working on my screenplay for Noah, and I'm going around Hollywood, and I don't have a lot of connections, but I eventually found out, of course, that he was working on it. And I thought, well, I don't really have a chance of beating the guy. So why don't I adapt it to a novel and start writing my novels? And then that way I know I will beat him. And I was worried, like, maybe he has some of these cool things that I discovered, like giants and watchers and stuff. And he kind of did, but, in my opinion, it was a terrible job. And
giant rock creatures, right?
Yeah, the giant rock creatures, yeah. But even then, his research was just, a lot of it was just made up stuff. And I went back to, ancient Jewish legends and traditions, and he did a little bit as well, but he just didn't find the storyline that I found in the Bible that was very, very fascinating. And so I was happy about that, but nevertheless, I felt this has to get out. And when I did the research on it, reading on the ancient book of Enoch and the pseudepigrapha and all this kind of stuff, and like I said, the other legends and such, as well as ancient religions in the Stone Age and before, we're talking Sumer. Sumer is one of the oldest civilizations we know of in Mesopotamia. And just finding out about their religions and their mythological beliefs. And I realized that there was a package here. There was something happening. There was an intersection of the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish understanding of the world and cosmos, and the pagan religions around them. There's a commonality, but there's a difference. And that fascinating storyline that Michael Heiser's work opened my eyes to is what became the Chronicles of the Nephilim, which is now eight complete novels. And that's kind of how that all started.
So you had you got interested in all of this, writing that screenplay and looking at Dr. Heiser's work.
Yes. Now,
Okay.
I had always been familiar. I'm a Christian, and I'd always been familiar with the Book of Genesis. I love Book of Genesis and trying to understand what the things mean.
Sure.
But Genesis 6, 1 through 4 had always been one of those really bizarre passages that I knew was there. But I know that, we're not always going to figure everything out in the Bible, so it's okay. And I just sort of passed it over because didn't make sense to me. And that was when it said the sons of God, these heavenly beings, came to earth and mated with the daughters of men, and they bore them the Nephilim, which are the great warriors of old. And what are the Nephilim and all that stuff? And I'd heard of some theories, but they just seemed wild to me. But when I needed to find out more about that, yes, I started reading Michael Heiser amongst lots of other authors as well. But what I liked about him was he's a scholar, a biblical scholar, and he does believe in the Bible, but he's also very aware and open to scholarship outside the Bible. So he's not like a fundamentalist type. And he's very, very informed on the mythology and the ancient Near Eastern background. And that was the doorway that opened up this fascinating storyline that I'd never seen before, even as a believer reading the Bible and stuff. And it was a storyline that I had to tell the world. And I thought, oh, this could be 3 or 4 books. And little did I know, oh my gosh, as time went on and I did more research, it ended up being, oh my gosh, this covers the whole Bible and even into the New Testament. And it's a storyline that is more than just the doctrinal things that, most believers, religious people will tell you. And,
Right.
you've got the standard things of the Bible, whether God's a creator and the Jews were waiting for the Messiah to come. And, these are stuff that we commonly hear. But this thing about the Nephilim in Genesis 6, it's not just, I discovered it's not just this obscure text that talks about giants, which, by the way, when you look into that word Nephilim, the word Nephilim or Nephilim, a lot of people say Nephilim, it actually is a transliteration of the Hebrew because they didn't know what to translate it into, so they just transliterated it from Hebrew to English. But what the word actually does mean is giants. And, there's a whole big sort of school of interest in giants nowadays. I'm aware of that. But what does that mean to the Bible? Is that just an obscure thing that, oh yeah, they show up in the Bible and maybe they're myth and maybe they're real and, but no, there's more to it than that. There's actually a thread that goes throughout and it pops up in various places. So when I would read the Bible, I would see these other bizarre passages. And again, I would just say, oh, another bizarre passage. But reading Heiser helped me connect them all. And that connection is what I wanted to tell. So my premise of writing Chronicles of the Nephilim was I wanted to retell this storyline by retelling you can't retell the whole Bible, right? Obviously.
Right,
but
right.
I thought everywhere that giants or Nephilim or the Watchers show up, I want to retell those stories. And because there's not a lot about them, I have to add a lot of, fictional, creative license, right? But my goal was this. I wanted to stay as true and consistent with the Bible as possible because I think people who like the Bible, they prefer that. They don't want you going off and making up stuff. They want you to stick to it as close as possible, but fill in between the lines that we don't know with stories that might make sense and might connect the dots. And that's what Chronicles of the Nephilim became. And at first, I thought it was going to be a risky venture. And the reason why is because, there's a lot of mythological integration in there. I use fantasy as a genre element. So I'll have things like a giant sea dragon of chaos called Leviathan. I'll have satyrs in the storyline and such. And my first thought was, look, a lot of religious people who like the Bible, they tend to really poo-poo the idea of mythology. If they, there's all kinds of takes on the Bible. Some people believe it's myth. Some people believe it's literal. Some people believe it's a mixture of both. But, I was a little worried that, the strong believers might attack it and just hate might work because
it has mythological creatures in it. And
yeah, exactly.
It's like Lord of the Rings or Narnia, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. In fact, that was my goal, was to sort of, I want to retell the Bible like Lord of the Rings, and I thought, oh man, that's really risky. But it turns out it wasn't. It turns out that the strong religious believers, Jews and Christians, have loved it because they get it. They realize that what I'm doing is I'm retelling these stories, but I'm using fantasy as a means to show the spiritual reality of what's going on. I don't know what things really look like in the spiritual realm. We don't, and we get glimpses, right? But by using that, it allows me to show the spiritual reality behind the historical truth and the mythological stuff. And, I don't see the Bible as being this, like fundamentalists might think of it as just this thing that stands out and it's untouched by anything else. And I don't see it that way. I see it as being a product of people who are ancient Near Easterners, just like everyone else.
Sure.
Therefore, they're knowledgeable. They were influenced as well as influenced on or by their surrounding cultures. So they integrate stuff and they change it to meet their own understanding. See, so I get that. I appreciate that imaginative element. And like I said, the biggest surprise was how the religious community really responded very positively about that. And that was a real pleasure.
Yeah, that's what I like about Heiser's work, is about he will put it in the context of the writers of the Bible and how they viewed the world and the cultures that were around them. And what I wanted to ask you, if you could kind of go through a little bit of the various books, who are the main characters in each book? What's the title? What's kind of like the different stages in each?
Sure. That's a great question. And I'll try to keep it brief and interesting. Sure. But like I said, Noah Primeval is the first book. And that was, retelling the story of Noah. And one of the things that I do in the series, I love action movies. And look, I'm a screenwriter. So my approach to the storytelling is going to be, it's going to be a little bit more action oriented. It's not going to, maybe briefer descriptions. I'm not as interested in going into long, detailed descriptions of things. So it's faster paced, that kind of thing. I want the reading of my books to be like you're watching a movie. That's my goal. And so that's kind of how I'm approaching it. And therefore, a lot of my heroes are the warriors in the Bible. But what's interesting is there are people in the Bible that are warriors that most people don't think they are. Noah's one of them. And the reason, think about it. The Bible talks about how in Genesis 6, before the flood, the heart of man was so wicked that every thought in his mind was only evil continually. I mean, that's pretty, and it says that violence filled the earth. So I'm thinking, if you're a righteous man in a violent world, you're going to have to be a warrior, right, to stay alive. And so I thought, well, Noah wasn't this old white guy with cute little animals that we see on Sunday school walls. No, he might have been a warrior. We don't really know, but he might have been. And so I depict it in that way. And I tell the story of, basically Genesis 6 and leading up to the flood and how Noah was called and how he sort of rejected the call. But what I do is I bring the Watcher paradigm in. And this is going to be valid for the whole rest of the series. And the Watcher paradigm, what I mean by that is this is another weird element of the Bible that shows up in the Bible, but also other ancient literature. And it's this notion that there are, as brief as possible, it's the notion that there are spiritual authorities, spiritual entities who are authorities over the nations. And this is something that's in the Bible as well. In Deuteronomy 32, it talks about how when God separated the nations at Babel, the Tower of Babel and how God divided the tongues and spread man out on the earth. And that's sort of the Bible theory for how the origin of the nations came. But those nations that talks about in Genesis 11, the 70 nations, it's explaining where they kind of basically come from, the Tower of Babel. But what it says in Deuteronomy 32, it says that when God did that, he allotted, and that's a very key word, it's a land-based word, or an inheritance word of land. He allotted the nations under the sons of God, these angelic heavenly beings, but he kept Jacob, or the people of Israel, for himself. And so basically what it's saying there is, look, mankind's so evil. Even after the flood, man is evil and builds the Tower of Babel. So if you're going to continue to be evil, he says basically, I'm going to give you over to these gods, false gods that you're worshiping, but they're actually true spiritual entities of some kind, and they're in authority over you. So the nations kind of have their own authorities. And this isn't, like I said, just a biblical view. This other ancient worldviews have this. So the unique angle I took on my series was I said, well, okay, all ancient religions had their pantheons of gods, like in Sumer, as well as pick your Babylon, China, whatever. They all have pantheons of gods, and the gods have different authorities and hierarchies, right? Well, in the ancient Sumerian and Mesopotamian world, each of the cities had their own patron deities or their own patron gods over it, right? It's the same concept. And so I thought, what if the gods of the ancient world, that we hear about, we all assume they're mythological. I said, what if they were based on real beings of some kind? Only they weren't real gods like we might think of them. They would have supernatural powers, but maybe they are these sons of God that the Bible talks about, these fallen angels, these angels that fell from heaven. And I said, what if that they were linked, and so they were like pretending to be the gods type of thing. And so that's the premise of what I bring into the whole series. So every series I've got these watcher gods, these fallen angels who the book of Enoch talks about how they came down on Mount Hermon, and that's in Lebanon, and when they did, they tried to deceive mankind, and they also mated with the daughters of men. And you get these hybrid, half human, half angelic beings. Yes, weird, freaky, I know, but nevertheless, this is where the concept came from of other religions that talked about their gods mating with human beings, because there probably was a real incident in the past of some kind that we don't understand fully. But that's where the Bible orients that original historical fall. And so they were the ones that sort of brought about the violence and violations of God's holiness, where they're uniting heaven and earth in a way that you're not supposed to, blah, blah, blah. And that leads to the evil, and then that leads to the flood. So God basically imprisons those original beings who fell, but there's still other beings who are around. And so these are the ones that after that flood who are now over the nations. So I tell that story in Noah Primeval, Noah and how it leads up to that. I talk about the Watchers and all this stuff. And I talk about this beginning of this seed line. This is the other element of the whole series that I deal with. I call it the War of the Seed. Because you see, this is the storyline in the Bible that's kind of underlying everything. And that is, in the Garden of Eden, with the serpent, and God curses the serpent, he says, I will put enmity between your seed, or your offspring, and the seed of the woman, seed of Eve, the seed of her offspring. And he says, you will bite his heel, but he will crush your head. And theologians will explain to you, and it's picked up in the New Testament as well, that is the first messianic promise that God would bring a seed from the woman who would ultimately crush the head of the serpent, the head of the ultimate enemy of man, so the goal line of these fallen watchers in my storyline is to find that seed in each generation and kill it, stop it,
right,
so that they can stop God's plan. And that is also what the Old Testament hints at and stuff, but I'm kind of bringing it more to the forefront. So that's sort of the big storyline of the whole thing, and it begins with Noah and it ends at Jesus. But the second novel, I go back for a prequel, and I call it Enoch Primordial. And the reason why is because if your listeners are probably familiar with Enoch, and they may be familiar with the ancient book of Enoch. And it's not in the Bible, but It's always been given a lot of respect within the Christian church and the Jewish community as well.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because there's a lot of people that have, you have this debate between people that believe and are putting emphasis on the Nephilim and people that don't, especially kind of like the fringe Christian community. Yeah. And some people believe, like the Book of Enoch, we really shouldn't be using it because it's not a biblical book. It's not in the Bible, right. Even though it is in the Ethiopian Bible, by the way. Right. That, I'm sure. But, let's talk a little bit about how the Enoch book is kind of like what the veracity of it is and where it's kind of quoted in the Bible.
Yes. Well, that's a good question. And I think that there's a renewed interest in the Book of Enoch.
Oh, yeah, there absolutely is.
I think in a good way and in some ways a bad way because, people, go out of control with it, in my opinion. But yeah, I come from the past that just didn't give anything value outside of the Bible that talks about religious things. And I no longer have that view in terms of, I do see value in things that aren't biblical. The Bible is my standard. And it's my ultimate authority, and I'm not ashamed to say that. But I also recognize that that doesn't mean that anything else is false. And unfortunately, a lot of religious people have that approach to things. And I came from that, but when I came from that background, so which is why it's very helpful because I understand that mindset. But when I did the research on it, and I found out that I had to face my prejudice and say, look, the Book of Enoch in particular, and by the way, it's only First Enoch because Enoch has three different books that they kind of put all together, and those come from varying different periods of history. But the Book of First Enoch is the most ancient one, and the thing that actually sold it for me as a Christian was, I'm thinking, okay, well, it's not my ultimate authority, so it's gotta be in the Bible, But then I realized, the Book of Enoch, first of all, for those who don't know, it tells that story of Genesis 6 in an expanded fashion. So this is where it has much more detail about the giants, about the watchers, mating. They come to Earth. They reveal occultic secrets, drugs, war, and it goes into much detail. They start, their offspring are giants that start to eat humanity, and they cause a gigantomachy is what the Greeks call it.
Yeah.
And this is where a lot of people think that, again, the Greek Titans got their notions from. But, anyway, so this is a book that talks about that material, and it's consistent, and it's not always very. It's consistent with the Bible, but it definitely expands on it. Okay, so your stronger religious people are going to say, no, it's not Scripture, so I don't believe any of it. But if you follow the history of Judaism and Christianity, you'll find that actually both of those have garnered, even though they didn't consider it Scripture, they have garnered it with great respect. And one of the reasons why is because the New Testament itself quotes the book of First Enoch. So you have a dilemma, because if you're a person who believes in the Bible, right, but then the Bible's quoting from a book, you're going to have to ask yourself and be honest and say, well, if the Bible writers have such respect for it, then certainly I should, or I'm not following the Bible, you see. And does that mean it's Scripture? No, it doesn't have to mean it's Scripture. But my point is, that's what opened my mind, as a believer in the Bible, to be able to consider, there's other literature, and it doesn't mean it's all truthful, but we can draw from it. And I think that's what's happening now is a lot of religious believers are really realizing that sort of prejudice has blocked us from other wisdom. And so nevertheless, I don't necessarily consider it Scripture myself, but you don't have to, it doesn't mean it's false. So I drew a lot from the book of Enoch, even to tell my story in Enoch Primordial, which is basically the original fall from Mount Hermon that the Watchers did, and how they first started breeding the giants, and how that all began. See? And Enoch, the Bible doesn't say much about him, but he's one of those mysterious folk that Christians and Jews have always had such a fascinating mystical interest, because it just says he was a righteous man and walked with God, and then he basically was not. He was translated into heaven because God took him. wow, what's that about? Why was he so holy? What's going on? Well, I tried to tell that story in Enoch Primordial as best I can, using my sources and filling in with creative license. And so that's the second novel. But then I go back into the rest of the series. I pick it up after the flood with, surprise, Gilgamesh Immortal.
That is the surprise in this, because most of the books are based off of someone that's in the Bible. And this is the one guy that's not in there. And I really wanted to talk about this tonight because the Epic of Gilgamesh is really interesting.
Yes, it is. It's the oldest hero story, extant hero story that we have. And what's so fascinating about it, if you read it, the English translations of it, it reads like a modern movie script.
Yeah,
so it's very fascinating how little changes in some ways. And so it is truly a fascinating story, and I've always wanted to retell it in a novel form. And that's not the reason why I wrote it, though. I mean, that was sort of like a lucky blessing, because what I discovered was there are many different theories that actually do connect Gilgamesh to the Bible. And I'm not going to explain why, because I don't want to ruin the surprise.
Yeah, I think there's this idea that Gilgamesh and Nimrod, who built the Tower of Babel, might actually be the same person. I've heard this theory.
There.
Yeah.
Yep. There are many different theories too about it. So, and not only that, so I kind of deal a little bit with that, but then also at the end of the Epic of Gilgamesh, what happens is basically the story of Gilgamesh is that he's this great and mighty leader, like the mightiest king of Uruk, and this is like in the days shortly after the flood. It says, right. And so he's like one of the first great kings, and he might have even been a giant, because it says he was 2/3 God, 2/3 man, 1/3 immortal, or 1/3 God, 2/3 man, and which means he might have been, maybe he was one of those who were the offspring of the Watchers and human, right? And then in the book itself, so it tells his journey about he kind of, it's like an existentialist sort of novel, because he sort of says, hey, I've got all these riches and all this stuff, but, and he even deals with the gods, but he realizes he's going to die. He faces death, and he realizes his mortality. So he seeks for eternal life. He wants to get eternal life. And so he goes on this journey, and in order to find eternal life. And at the end of the journey, he finds out that the only person who supposedly has eternal life is Noah and his wife, who are hidden out on some distant island because of the immortals, and they've been given the secret of immortality. So he seeks them. So that's obviously connected with my storyline, and I bring that in, and I retell the Epic of Gilgamesh. And if you're familiar with the epic, you'll notice that I really stuck close to it, as close as possible, because it's so cool. But I integrated it into this biblical storyline in a way that actually makes sense, and people have been loving it. And at the same time, you sort of get more of a modern storytelling novel retelling of the Epic of Gilgamesh.
I wanted to ask you about, because you do a really good job in the book that compiles all the appendixes when giants walk the earth, and you do a good job of looking at the flood narrative from the Bible and the flood narrative from the Epic of Gilgamesh, and often, as it's kind of become popular, especially since that epic was discovered in the 19th century, that to say that the biblical story is actually derives from the Gilgamesh epic. But you're the first person that I've seen, or that I'm aware of, I'm sure there's been other scholarly works about this, that kind of says, well, no, that's not necessarily true, that they probably come from the same source, but one is not a copy of the other.
Exactly. And look, people like to do that so that they can, if someone derives a story from someone else, then it's probably not true, and
right.
That's just kind of ridiculous, because every historian, even of modern day, uses sources, right? So that doesn't, that's not an issue to me. So I have no problem in fact, I think Moses or whoever wrote the Pentateuch, the book of Genesis, and I think Moses wrote most of it, but I don't think he wrote all of it. Whoever, and there were editors. So I think that whoever did, they drew from sources, and they even tell you they drew from sources in many places. So I would have no problem if they did. But when you look close at them, the elements in stories that are the same are strong markers for connection. However, when you look at the things that are not the same, those can sometimes be much more powerful markers of disconnection than similarities can be for connections. And what I mean by that is look, the notion of a flood is, if there really was a worldwide flood, wouldn't it make sense that all religions across the earth would have different versions of it? So that's not a problem. Or even if there wasn't, every culture is going to know about floods because the floods happen everywhere. So any culture can come up with a flood story. They don't have to steal it from someone else, right?
Sure.
And yeah, so when you look into those details, you find that they're really pretty significant enough that makes you really doubt that the likelihood is that they both drew from a more ancient source, more than likely, So yeah, because I don't think that the Genesis text came down from God. So I believe they definitely use sources. But yeah, it's an interesting excursion, and but it is interesting that when I say Noah, when I say Gilgamesh is searching for Noah, in the Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh, the Noah character is actually called it escapes my mind. What is it?
Utnapishtim.
Yeah, Utnapishtim.
Yeah.
And so, he has a different name, but it's very clearly the survivor of the flood. And it's interesting that some scholars pointed out that if you look at the middle of Utnapishtim, the middle of his name has the possibility of being Noah within the middle of the name. So that's kind of fascinating,
Yeah, it really is. It's interesting how the two cultures intersect there.
This is something that I do in the series. And again, I come from the background, of sort of the conservative religious community has always been fearful of mythology because they think that, well, if you show that there's some similarities with myths in the Bible, then that means the Bible's a myth and you can't rely on it and blah, blah, And it's this real fearful approach to the text that I just don't think is really appropriate or necessary. There's no problem with knowing that whatever your religious source is, draws from other sources and integrates it through its own interpretation of things, because we all do that, And I think that's what, when you try to show how all of these things can work together and fit together and sort of, that's where they kind of came from, that's how they connected, it helps make sense of that. And by knowing the ancient Near Eastern background and finding these connections, it actually makes the text, the original text, much more fuller and opener and more imaginative, And I think, like I said, I have to say, I think a lot of religious people are getting it and appreciating that.
Right. Well, that's good. That's a really good thing that they accept that. What's the next book in the series after the Gilgamesh?
So the next one after that is actually Abraham Allegiant, and that tells the story of the main stories that people are going to recognize. That tells the story of the Tower of Babel.
Okay.
And there, in the Bible, there's a possibility that Abraham may have lived during that time period, but it's not clear and it's not likely. But there are some Jewish legends that suggest Abraham himself met and interacted with Nimrod. So I draw from those legends, because that allows me to tell the story cool. And it ends shortly after Sodom and Gomorrah, another one of those interesting events that occurred, very dramatic, but it's so extreme of an event that I think there's something more meaning going on there behind just God's cursing these 5 cities because they're evil and wicked. I think it's extreme for a reason, extreme on the level of the flood, and so I actually suggest that there may be some more of that same angelic human genetic mix-up stuff that was going on in those cities at that time period, which is why God, he said he would never flood the earth again, but that the destruction on those cities is unlike anything he's done anywhere else.
Yeah, you make the point in that as it says in the Bible, that the men of Sodom lusted after strange flesh, and that's often been interpreted as being that they were homosexual.
Right. Right.
But you look at it as, and especially this makes sense in the context of the story, because when they see the angels that come to rescue Lot, when they see them, they want to have sex with them. And so this, the idea that they're actually, what they want to do is they want to mingle with the angels.
Yes, exactly. And now what's interesting is in the Old Testament tradition, it does focus, it tends to be more of a reference to the basic, the homosexuality going on there. And there's some other elements of Sodom and Gomorrah, like their inhospitality and stuff. But my point is it's actually the New Testament that sort of looks back and adds a new aspect to it that wasn't always in there. And the reason why is because in the intertestamental period, between the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, a lot of Jewish literature was written that wasn't considered scripture, but it deals with these issues. And they're the ones that bring out these watcher connections and such. So by the time of the New Testament, you read the book of Jude and Peter, I think it's First Peter, and they make reference to Sodom and Gomorrah, not just about the judgment, but they make reference to this going after strange flesh thing. And the context there is clearly not homosexuality. Now, that's not to say that it has nothing to do with homosexuality, because it's maybe a whole big part of a package. But what the New Testament is bringing in, it's saying there's more to it than that. There's this supernatural violation that's going on, violation of the heavenly earthly divide and such. And so the New Testament authors are the ones that sort of bring that notion back into the discussion. And that's why I went back and retold that story within that context. So I tell the story of Abraham. Now, Abraham's cool because he's another one of those guys that if anyone who knows this story, they think of him as an old guy, because he lived to be really old, right? He was 100 before he had a kid, right?
Right.
But, you think of him as this old guy with sheep, and, he's a pastoralist, and he travels around looking for a place to live. Well, yeah, he was old, but there's one interesting chapter, Genesis 14, that most people don't recognize, and that was, there's a time period where Abraham takes a few hundred of his men and goes to rescue his nephew Lot, who was captured by these armies. And these armies are like five cities banded together, right? And they capture his nephew. And he goes back and he hunts them down and rescues his nephew. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not just a sheep herder. That's a guy who's a warrior, So Abraham too, I have him as a warrior in my story. And I continue to tell that storyline and how, and of course, in the Bible, Abraham's the father of Israel, and that all leads to Jesus and Messiah. And so, he's one of those in the line of that bloodline of the Messiah, the seed of the woman, right? That the bad guys are trying to kill. So in all my novels, you've got these watchers and they're giants, and they're trying to find out who's God's chosen man in this generation. Let's kill him and let's stop that bloodline, right? So by the time of the Promised Land, the next novels after Abraham Allegiant, it's two novels that are basically part 1 and 2, and they're Joshua Valiant and Caleb Vigilant. And basically those tell the story of Joshua's conquering of the Promised Land. And I think most people have heard that basic story about how the spies go into the land to find out what it's like, and they come back saying, the land is full of what? Giants! Yeah. And it's like, oh, is this just another oddity? No, there's a reason. This all goes back to Genesis, and it even says so in Numbers 13:33, I think. It talks about how the giants in the land, they call them the Anakim. There's various clans, and they give them various clan names. The Anakim, the Emim, the Zamzumim, or the Zuzim, and the Rephaim. And here's why most people don't see the giant stuff in Scripture, because these giant clans are indicated as such in one or two places, but then in other places you just hear the name. So people don't necessarily know that that's what's being talked about. And that's why, even back in the time of Abraham, it talks about how during the time of Abraham, these guys were going around hunting down these giant clans, even at that time. So by the time of the Promised Land, these Anakim giants and Rephaim are filling the land of Israel, and God basically has Joshua go and hunt down those giants. And this is what brings meaning to a lot of the texts that people always thought was weird. Like, Why does he say go and kill every man, woman, and child? I mean, that's weird, Well, he only said that of the specific clans and areas that were full of giants. So there's some kind of genetic thing going on there that's in the bloodline, and it's unholy. And so it's not, they're going into the land, and this is part of the war of the seed of the serpent. The Nephilim, the giants, are considered seed of the serpent, and that's part of what's going on in that storyline that many people don't catch. They just think of it as, they're just clearing the land out because God gave them the land. No, there's more to it than that. And I tell that story in more detail because the book of Joshua mentions several names of very mighty giant warriors. They're called Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, and they're mentioned 3 times. Whenever the Bible mentions someone 3 times, that means they're really important, but it doesn't tell us any more details. It just tells us who killed them. So I tell the story of those 3 brothers who are giant Anakims leading the land when Joshua comes in, and they are the ones that are putting up the big fight. And so I try to tell that story of those battles. And by the way, I want to stop here and take a break and mention I'm a guy, so I tend to focus on action. But as a matter of fact, I try to put romance in all my novels. And so a lot of women have been loving them too. For instance, I'm very proud of my romance of Abraham and Sarah. Because they're a very good marriage and a good couple who's struggling through life with being childless, right? And I'm very proud of that because, we tend to like stories about adultery or failed marriages because drama is interesting. But I show what a good marriage can look like in the midst of a world full of bad marriage. And then in the time of Joshua, my favorite character of my whole 8 novels, personally, is Rahab. And we all have heard of the story of Rahab the harlot, who she converted to Israel and helped the spies come in to see what was going on in Jericho. And Jericho was that city with the big, huge walls that God made the walls fall down, right? Well, the harlot Rahab, she was a harlot who converted. So I tell her story and how she came to be. And she's a very strong woman, and she ends up being a key in the bloodline of Jesus. So telling that story is going to be a really cool thing too. And people have loved it. And like I said, I try to have the romance and strong women actually, because that even though in the ancient world, men were, obviously it was patriarchal culture, the Bible really brings focus on key women throughout that storyline, that whether it's Deborah or Sarah, all the way up to Rahab and even up to Mary. And I try to do that in my series as well.
I want to ask you a question about, and this is a question that I really think that you could take like a whole show and do this, but the Joshua story. Yeah. I've always had somewhat of an issue with the story of what basically, really what you can't paint it as anything else. It's almost like a genocide that takes place there. Right. And there's almost like a justification of this genocide and saying that these were corrupted people and they needed to be done away with. I've always had a problem with that. And I guess maybe it's just more of like my studies and like the Holocaust and the genocides of the 20th century. And maybe I'm putting, current events onto something that happened 3,500 years ago. But, do you feel, and I really just kind of want to be careful with this, to say that, was there any, when the Bible was written, was there any kind of like, was this to justify, when they looked back and said, okay, this is what Joshua did. Do you think that there could have been any like justification there of saying, okay, this is how we came up on top? Or do you think they even thought that way?
Yeah, I think that it's fair to wrestle with that issue, because I too, and even though I consider the Bible to be trustworthy, I have a lot of doubts and I have a lot of issues with it too. But
Sure, because the thing is that you could look at those passages and you could really see how those could be abused. I mean, a good case in point would be something like the Puritans and their idea that they felt that they were the new Israelites. Well, look what they did to the Native Americans. I mean,
and westward, what was it? Manifest Destiny.
Yeah,
and I certainly wouldn't support Manifest Destiny. So granted, but there's a few things that I would just like to throw out to reconsider. We are moderns in that we approach history, we approach understanding, and even more morality and how we understand morality. We often do not realize how much a product of our culture that we really are. So we're blinded to other cultures because we interpret through our own. And I think that as moderns, we're very guilty of being imperialistic, meaning we'll impose our own morals and what we know as, on other cultures without seeking to understand them first within their context. And then a lot of times things are better understood. And that is what I would argue we have to approach, certainly with ancient history. We have to start with understanding their context first, and we might learn a little bit about our own prejudices. So that's the first thing. When I approach ancient history, I try to do it that way, and that's how I approach that particular the particular case. And one of the issues of which is well, let's see. There's many ways. I'll just keep it to a couple. One thing would be
it's a complex thought. It really is.
It is. There's a lot of complexity to it. Number one, in the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, sorry, but everybody was killing everybody. So the reality is to survive, you had to fight back, you had to defend, you had to, if you wanted to live, you had to kill everyone. So we live in a modern world that, and certainly in Western cultures that are more advanced. I mean, obviously in the Middle East, there's barbarism still going on, but we just don't have that. We don't have that violence,
No.
So we don't understand what it's like to live in a Bronze Age culture of survival. And so, the fact that they killed a lot of people, if you understand it in its original context, it's really not unusual because everybody was. Now that doesn't make it right, but it does help you to understand, well, now wait a minute. If everybody's doing it, you have to understand within their context, how were they different in how they approached it, and how did they treat? And this is where I would argue that, if you look at the Mosaic laws, part of the amazing things about them was they do reflect some similarities of the culture, but they transcend a lot of the laws of the cultures around them. In other words, the Mosaic law was much more compassionate, it was building a trajectory that was actually away from the brutality and barbarism, but all the people were barbaric, so you had to work within that original context. But even apart from that, there's lastly my biggest personal way that I deal with this issue is however you come at an issue like this, a moral issue, you have to be aware of your own prejudices. And so if you assume there is no God, therefore anyone who claims God is obviously delusional or lying. Therefore, everyone who claims God tells them to do something is only justifying, right? Well, of course you're going to assume, well, the Jews are doing the same thing. They just said God told them to kill everybody, and they did. That's no different than everybody else. But that's assuming your own prejudice, which is that there is no God. But if there is a God, and I'm not saying there is, but I'm just saying if there is, and the claim of the Bible is there is one true God, and the other gods were lies and such, but there is a true God, and he does own the earth, and he does have the right to give a land to anybody he wishes. And if he says, these people are evil, they don't deserve it, and I'm going to give you the land, then for you to say that he doesn't is for you to simply say, well, there is no God that exists, and I know that. And so, you see what I'm saying? So there's
Right.
this, you have to recognize that, well, wait a minute, but if there is a God and he said it, then that makes him different from all the other claims, because just because someone claims God gives you a land and says to kill people doesn't mean that that's true. But if he did, then none of us can say he's wrong because he's God. Now, again, that's all based on faith or not faith, but both sides approach that issue with an assumption. And that's all I'm trying to say, is to be aware of your assumption. And otherwise you're going to be just imposing your own limited viewpoint upon understanding history. So that's at least would begin to help to understand the picture, at least from a different perspective.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
And I'm sure there's all kinds of different perspectives on that one issue. And
Absolutely.
I said,
And,
we could go on and on about it. You know what I mean?
Of course. But if you think about it logically and rationally, yes, of course, Muslims are saying the same thing. Their God's the only God. And yes, everyone says that. But is there a truth? And if there is one true God, and he does say that, then the fact is he's right. But even if you don't take it from the raw fact of, well, God said so, the Bible actually, apart from all that, the Bible does describe what was going on in Canaan at the time. And this is another argument that can be easily made without having to say, God said it, so shut up. And that is that the abominations of what was going on in Canaan were so barbaric, offering their children in the fires of Molech. They would sacrifice their children, by the thousands, in order to protect their land. Their sexual perversity was so, incest, everything was going on there. And these are the kind of things that were going on. And so this was a society of such depravity that if you look throughout history, it is very common that survivors will start things back up again. And so there is a wickedness and a spiritual demonic wickedness that the Bible talks about. Again, if you don't believe it's possible to have demonic spiritual evil and stuff, then maybe you won't accept this. But it does certainly claim that on a level that is, in my opinion, it's pretty much, wow, yeah, it's really true. I mean, this wickedness is bad. And so it's kind of like, I don't know. But it's certainly how everyone operated. And then that's a whole other thing. It's interesting because there's a whole other angle that the language of holy wars, where it says we killed every man, woman, and child, it's interesting because there's an entire book on that issue that looks at the common language of other cultures, and guess what? They all use the same language. All the ancient Near Eastern cultures would say, we went in, we killed every man, woman, and child. But the facts of history are they didn't.
Yeah.
And so there is also a strong argument that is basic military language that just says we conquered and we own the land now.
Yeah,
so
the Assyrians were very good about saying that too. Yeah.
Yes, and now the Assyrians did kill a lot. The Assyrians did some brutality. Right. But the point is the language is not as absolute as it even appears, and it doesn't mean it's lying, and it doesn't mean it's false. It just means you have to understand the language the way they used it and what they meant by it. And when you do, you realize maybe it's not as extreme as we read it because, again, we're reading it through our biased eyes.
Right. That's a very good answer. And that's what I was kind of hoping you would go with that. It's just still something to me that I still kind of like struggle with, even as a Christian. I mean, it's very hard to get kind of that education of realizing that this is wrong, and then you read it, but it's there in your holy book. It's one of the things I still really struggle with. But let's talk.
Fair enough. So do I.
Right.
Can I just recommend one book though that I've really found really helpful in dealing with all those kinds of issues in the Bible? Because this is really big now. The new atheists, they're always ragging on all these weird things in the Bible, and people are starting to attack the Bible and say it's barbaric and stuff. And there's a book called "Is God a Moral Monster" by Copan, I think is the last name. Is God a Moral Monster? And he tries to be faithful to explaining all of these issues. So anyway,
right,
recommend.
Excellent. Okay, I'll have to check that out. Real quick, because we're low on time. But the other books in the series are you have Caleb Vigilant
and then David Ascendant, and that basically tell the story of David like no one's ever heard it before. Everyone's familiar with David, right? And we think we know it, but there are mentions of giants by name who were hunting David. Goliath was not the only one, and they were specifically trying to kill David. What's that about, right? So I tell the story of those. There's actually 5 of them who are part of basically a secret assassin cult of warriors. And so I tell their story, and David's rise. And of course, King David is the ultimate precursor to the Messiah. And then in Jesus Triumphant, most people would say, wait a minute, there's no giants in the Gospels, but actually I argue there is Nephilim. And the basic premise is this. There's hints of this in the Bible, but you can get a lot of this from Enoch and from other non-biblical sources. So it's a theory, but it's not, and that is that the demons that play a big part in the Gospels and in the ministry of Jesus, why is he casting out the demons? What's the point? Is it just, I'm powerful? No, it's very, very pointed, and it's the conclusion of this whole thing. If the Nephilim were the seed of the serpent fighting against the seed of Eve, the messianic line, the ultimate fulfiller of that is Jesus as the Messiah. He's the ultimate seed of the woman. And wouldn't it make sense that he does the ultimate conquering? Because when King David comes along, he kills Goliath, but he doesn't, and he kills the Rephaim. And so the physical giants are gone. But the book of Enoch and basically says that demons are the spirits of the dead Nephilim. And so those Nephilim who are still sort of against God, they're in the demonic realm, and Jesus as the ultimate Messiah is fighting those in the spiritual realm and casting out those Nephilim from the land, which ties it all the way back to Noah, see? And there's a lot more than that, by the way. And I also found in a historical reference to a giant that was around the time of Christ, around his last couple years, and possibly in the area where Jesus was. So I got that from the book from Josephus, the ancient Jewish writer, and I integrate that into the story as well. So my Jesus Triumphant novel, everyone's probably done a dozen novels on Jesus, but mine is unlike anything you've ever read because it's all about the spiritual warfare, and it concludes all the stuff with the Nephilim, the Watchers, and Christ's descent into hell, or into Hades, actually, and how he conquers and wins and brings back in victory. And it just really shows the spiritual truth in a way that I've never seen done before. And it wraps up this whole storyline in a really cool spiritual way.
Brian, I'm going to have you back on at some point to kind of explore some of these wider themes, because a lot of it, like we're doing the explanation of the of the entire series. But at some point, I'd love to have you back on to talk about it. But what's next for you? I mean, what are you working on now? And then also, where can people get these books? And also, you have another book that compiles the appendices that I've read that is very good at explaining some of the themes.
Yes, and that was When Giants Were Upon the Earth. Basically, at the end of each novel, I wrote an appendix to explain where I got a lot of the historical, mythological, biblical research for people who wanted to know, because I thought it was so wild. People would go, how did he make this stuff up? I'm like, I didn't. And so, but people were saying they loved the appendix as much as the novel, so I decided to take all the appendixes out for those who just wanted the Bible study, the history study, and put it into one book. And that's become one of the best-selling books of the series, and that's called When Giants Were Upon the Earth. All my books are in audio book format as well as Kindle and paperback, exclusively on Amazon. But here's the thing, a couple things, you might want to write this down, fans. Go to the website, chroniclesofthenephilim.com, or Godawa.com, basically, my name. And you can find a whole website of free stuff, cool videos, fantastic artwork of the series, real cool stuff that people will like, and as well as articles about the scholarly stuff behind what I'm doing. And then also, you can sign up for the newsletter and get in on freebies and stuff that I have coming up. But you buy everything on Amazon, and that's where you buy it. But excuse me. Lastly, I'll be contacting you actually probably in a month, because I've got the 2 other series I'm working on. But right now, the next series is Chronicles of the Watchers. And the first book is ready, almost done. It's called The Dragon King. And it basically tells the story of the first emperor of China. This is around 200 BC. And I found I wrote it with Charlie Wen, who was the visual director of Marvel Studios. And we found some amazing information that connects the ancient Chinese world that was disconnected from the Western world, but there actually is some connection back to the Tower of Babel and to Genesis in a fascinating way. And so we retell that story again with a little bit of the Watcher paradigm and a little bit of fantasy to sort of, make it come alive. And so that's the next book that's coming out and the next series. But I'm also simultaneously starting another series, which is called Chronicles of the Apocalypse. All this stuff is at my website, so if people want to find out more information, they can go there.
You're a busy guy, Brian. You got a lot going on. Well, we're gonna have to definitely have you back on to talk about some of this other stuff, and like I said, to talk about some of the deeper themes, some of the deeper meanings.
Would love to.
Thank you so much for being on the show tonight. We really appreciate you coming on, and we're gonna close this section out, but stay on the line just with us briefly, Brian. We'll be right back on Conspiranormal. All right, guys, we're back on Conspiranormal, and it's kind of a short but sweet interview. What'd you think about that, Luke? You were kind of quiet through most of it.
Yeah. I'm not a big Bible guy, as all of our listeners probably know.
I'm sure they're probably aware.
but I liked whenever he was talking about the Nephilim tribes. Like, that was pretty cool. He was like naming off the different tribes, and this kind of like little sub story that you have going on in the undercurrent, of the Bible between the lines, there's all this historical stuff going on, and that kind of stuff is really interesting to me.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot more we could have probably gotten into, and I think part of it was that we were trying to kind of get the idea of what his whole book series was about and what each book was about, what he was hitting. I think if we have him on again, we can kind of talk about some of the wider issues involved. What do you think about that, Rob?
I thought it was cool. I like the fact that it's very well anchored in the source material and not just the Bible itself, but he reached out to everything else from that era, because I think that the Bible itself was a compilation of writings and
sure,
possibly the best writings of the time and the most accurate and representative of the time or whatever, but it was probably edited from 100 times that much source material. So there's a lot of other little things to pick and choose from, and I like the fact that he really did try to hold true to all the stories outside of that, but keep it accurate to the Bible itself, and then kind of fantasize on top of that.
Right. And I think he was like you said, he thought people were going to have a problem with that, and that
a lot of people will, for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure some people would have a problem even if you put like anything in there like a Seder or anything like that. And I'm kind of glad that one of the things that I was kind of meant to talk about this with Dr. Heiser, and I'd still like to talk about him with it, is that like I said, one of the things that I've had a big problem with and that I've struggled with really is this whole idea of what's basically is pretty much genocide in the Bible. And this idea that, the Israelites went in and were commanded to kill men, women, and children and not to leave a trace of them left. And, that's always kind of bothered me, like I said. But, inside on that, Luke, I'd like to know how you think about that.
Here goes some more hate mail.
Here we go.
I mean,
we were talking about Molech and throwing kids into the fire. You were giving thumbs up over here.
I was. I mean, my view on the whole Molech thing is like I don't even actually think that children were being sacrificed or burned. I think that they meant like purification through fire. I don't even actually think that they were sacrificing children.
There's actually some debate over that because I looked up. The only thing I really looked up on it was like a Wikipedia article. And I think a good person to ask about that would probably be like an archaeologist or somebody that's kind of studied that subject.
Yeah.
Whether or not it was like symbolic language or whether it was actually taking place.
I think it's symbolic. But
like the Burning Man.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough though, because, I was just reading some articles on IFL Science the other day about some of the sacrificing rituals down in Mexico, with the Aztecs and some of the new finds, with the bones, the surveys and stuff that they've done on the bones that they found inside the Temple of the Sun, in Teotihuacan.
It's a big word.
Yeah, right.
It's a tongue twister, man.
But I mean, so obviously there were these early races of people that were very barbaric, and a lot of sacrifices and stuff did go on. But in that particular case, I think they were just like, it was a rite of purification for the children.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it all depends on who you ask about it. We were talking during the break, and turning from this real serious issue to you actually forgot to talk about something that you did on New Year's Eve.
I did. I can't believe
this is some real classy stuff here.
I can't believe I forgot to talk about it.
If you come to Nashville, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you would get to enjoy.
I had the delight of seeing Mama June from Honey Boo Boo, and
where did you see Mama June from Honey Boo Boo?
Deja Vu, Deja Vu, the strip club. I was hoping that Mama June would strip too, but
okay, so she wasn't taking it all off.
No, she was just at a table signing autographs. But Sassy Cassie was the star of the show. And she's she is the shortest stripper in the world at like what 2 foot something, like almost 3 feet. I didn't know whether to be turned on or I don't know. There's a little deformation going on there, you know. I guess if you're drunk, you have your beer goggles on, you can look past it, but
you got to have really big beer goggles, right? Because you got to make sure you're looking in the right. You're looking down.
and then me and Debo know one of the showgirls that works there. and she took a bunch of pictures with her and stuff after the show.
Very nice pictures.
I'm sure they will, and I don't think they'll be up on our site. But
it's always a pleasure to see someone we know strip along with the world's smallest stripper.
By the way, that laugh is Adam.
Yeah, it's always classy, and I know you love it.
That's world famous.
Yeah, my laugh is the best. All right, guys, I think that's probably where we're going to call it tonight. Next week, we're going to be back, and we're going to have another screenwriter in Hollywood, as I mentioned before, and this is Dan Gordon. And Dan was not only a screenwriter in Hollywood, he's written a couple of movies like Passenger 57 and a few other movies that others may know. We'll get into that next week, but he's written a book called Day of the Dead, and this is not about zombies. This is about what's the situation in Gaza. And I really want to kind of get his idea of what's going on with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and what Israel's goals are, what its wants, what its concerns are, because he used to be a member of the Israeli Defense Force. And guy's got a lot of experience, and there's a lot to talk about in this one. So I'm really looking forward to that next week. But unless there's anything else we want to talk about, we'll call it a night. Tumbleweeds. All right, guys. We're super stoked about 2016. And Debo, thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Thank you for letting me come.
Absolutely. And guys, we will be back here next week on Conspiranormal.
It's more of the fact that we're not allowed to go longer.
So listen to the tale I tell, gods and monsters, death and hell, and how his friend Enkidu fell once upon a time. Gilgamesh the hero wished that he could build a wall, make it strong and sturdy so that it would never fall. So he made the men to work, the women to his beck and call. They wished that he was gone. Out to the gods who heard their pleas, so they created Enkidu among the trees, a human beast when he was born with hairy hide and head of horn. And a priestess came, and as she neared, she looked at him and said, "He's weird." Hacked his horns and cut his beard and took him to the town. Gilgamesh and Enkidu both mad and muscles flexed. Enkidu would not give in, and Gilgamesh was vexed. So they both said, "Bring it on," and you can guess what happened next. The main event was on. They hit and bit and punched and scratched all through the night. It matched an epic fight. They both give up the battle ends and they decide to be best friends. Thinking it would make them great, they beat Humbaba at the gate, which made the wind god quite irate. Our heroes took care. Humbaba was beaten, but the beast was barely mourned. Their greatest war was yet to come, they should have been forewarned. Humbaba hath no fury like a goddess who's been scorned. That battle can't be won. Ishtar asked them for a date, but they said no. She sent the bull of heaven down with grief and woe. The boys avoided his attack, cracked his horns and broke his back. So to Enkidu that she sent influenza down he went. So Gilgamesh his clothes he rent, and then he sang this song. Oh death, oh death, won't you spare me over till another year? Well, what is this that I can see with ice cold hands taking hold of me? I am death come to take you home, where your drink is dirt and your bread is stone. I'll fix your feet till you can't walk, I'll jam your jaw till you can't talk. I'll flay the flesh off of your bones, and worms will crawl inside your nose. Oh death, oh death, won't you spare me over till another year? Gilgamesh was searching for eternal life, for ancient Utnapishtim and his ageless wife. Make me immortal, please, he said. He fell asleep. They baked some bread. They told him where the life tree grew. Serpent stole it, now he's doomed. One day he will be entombed. At least I have my walls. Gilgamesh the hero lies a moldering